People have opinions without being fully informed.
Trust me, I'm a Canadian here.
I don't care if you're a Christian, Messianic, or Hebrew roots. I want to know if your theology is biblical.
Maybe I'm right. Of course I'm right.
If you're going to cite a source, be responsible. Cite your source.
Your mom goes to college.
Hey, we're just having a conversation. There's only 36 people listening anyway, right?
You can Google it.
Wow, at what point does history matter? At what point does truth matter?
An alien invasion. Is it biblical? Of course it is.
Look, there's a way to do scholarship and a way not to do scholarship. You got to cite your source. Who's your source?
My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows his kid is going with the girl.
And that about sums it up. What up? And shalom. Welcome to the Rob and Caleb Show, the show where theology matters, scholarship counts, and theology matters. My name is Caleb Haig. With me, of course, Rob Van Hoff. What up, Rob? How's it going, brother?
Hey, Caleb.
Yeah, we're doing some you can tell we jumped online a minute late, which, no big deal, whatever, but minute late, and we're behind because we're actually still grabbing topics for the show, which is fine. That's good. Okay. Well, what up and shalom to everybody out there in, digital land. Well, let's get our sponsors out of the way. The Rob and Caleb Show is brought to you by TorahResource.com. I even have a little thing for it. Here you go, TorahResource.com. Go to Torah Resource and find all sorts of great things. I was perusing the articles that we have on Torah Resource this morning, and I gotta say, over 100 theological articles, and they're all free. And boy, there are some really good ones. Most of them written by my father, Tim Haig. I would encourage anyone to go. And by the way, we did something special this last week. We put on share buttons on all of the articles. So you can go in now, choose your favorite social media, and share it directly there. And I would encourage you to share those articles with your friends and family. I think that they're good enough to do so. The Rob and Caleb Show is also brought to you by Chava Messianic Radio. Chava Messianic Radio, you can listen to Messianic and Hebrew Roots movement on demand. It's quite the website. Our good friend Judah has really put some significant work into making that radio station a good on-demand resource for, and his tagline is great too, music for Yeshua's disciples, and that's exactly what it is. So you can go, if you have a favorite artist or whatnot, I can almost guarantee you it's probably, if it's in the Messianic realm, it's going to be on Chava Messianic Radio, and you can listen to it on demand, which is always very nice. And then finally, last but not least, the Rob and Caleb Show is also brought to you by Yeshua Shirts, YeshuaShirts.com. Are you lacking a piece of clothing that says Yeshua on it? If you are, then you should definitely go to Yeshua Shirts. And the fine people at Yeshua Shirts have actually given us a coupon code for those who listen to the Rob and Caleb Show. Put into the coupon box TR Radio, and you will get, I believe it's 10% off. And that probably cover your shipping if you're in the United States, something like that, or most of your shipping at least. So Yeshua Shirts, start a conversation today. All right. And I should also say, I was looking today also on our Rob and Caleb Show page, which is on Torah Resource. So you go to TorahResource.com, hover over the radio page or the radio tab, and then go down to the Rob and Caleb Show. That's our page. And on that page, you can listen to all of our archive shows all the way from starting at number 1 through the current show. And the other thing you can do is sign up for our show notes. And I would very much encourage you to sign up for our show notes. Right now, believe it or not, Rob, and we joke on this show a lot. If you're first time you're joining us, we joke on this show a lot that nobody really wants to listen to us, and therefore we only have 36 listeners. Every time we get a new listener, that means that we lost a listener too, because our number always stays at 36. Now,
that's right.
With that being said, we have 176 people who receive our show notes now.
Cool.
That blows my mind. Anyway, I've started putting more than just links in our show notes. I've put some other things in there as well. I'm trying to make it a little bit more interesting. So there's more news each week. So definitely do that. And finally, a request to our solid 36 listeners. If you have a chance sometime, go find us on iTunes, The Rob and Caleb Show on iTunes. Write a review. We have 2 reviews right now. One of them is, I know who it is.
Good and one's bad. No.
Well, they're both good in my opinion. One, I think my wife wrote, I think. And the other one says, the Beavis and Butthead of podcasting, which I think is a shining review. Interestingly enough.
Can you play the first couple seconds of the Hoff Goes Off?
I can't because my soundboard system needs to be updated and it will not work on my current system. I apologize. Yeah, but actually, one of my good friends said that he started listening to the Rob and Caleb Show because of that comment. So, it's good press. Any press is good press, right? Okay. What up and shalom to everybody in the chat room. Thank you very much for joining us today. We got a little bit of a light crowd today, but that's okay. We're happy that every single one of you are there with us. And people, you might not know this, but people contribute to this show in many, many, many different ways. One of those ways is definitely in the chat room. These fine folks in the chat room, a lot of the time know a lot more than I do. They tend to look things up and set us straight on things live during the show, which is great. So thank you for that. You can be a part of this show too. Oops, wrong one. You can go to our comment line, call 253-465-3205. I'll give it to you again. It's 253-465-3205. You will not talk to us. You will get an answering machine. Leave us messages. Tell us how much you like us or hate us or whatever. And then also send us email, chaggett@torahresource.com. Wow, that was long.
And if you really want to talk to one of us, you can.
Yeah. Just shoot us an email and tell us.
Say, hey, can we set up a time to talk or something?
I got to say, our intro now is becoming longer and longer. Maybe we should sprinkle it throughout the show. Instead of giving all of our sponsors all at once, we'll sprinkle them through the show. I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Whatever. All right. Well, what a show we have today for you. I can always tell it's going to be a good show when I'm nervous because I feel like we don't have enough to talk about. That's usually the shows where we talk the most. And where we get into some really deep conversations. I asked this beforehand, before we came on air. I'll ask it on air so that other people can be made aware of it as well. Rob got his master's at the UW, that is the University of Washington, Huskies. And are you a huge Huskies fan?
Actually, I was in survival mode for so many years. I didn't even pay attention to football. So
yeah, okay, fair enough.
It's funny. All my siblings went to WSU, which is the rival state university here in Washington.
They went to Wazoo.
They're Cougars, yeah.
Ooh,
I'm like the odd one out. And that's not the only way in life that I'm the odd one out, but it's one of the many.
I could start making jokes about Wazoo, but I won't. Okay, anyway, so you got your master's in what, Near Eastern language? No, Near Eastern.
Technically, my bachelor's it was with the NELC, Near Eastern Language and Civilization. They call it NELC, N-E-L-C. But my master's was under the Comparative Religion Department. And my focus was on rabbinic interpretation of Scripture, Jewish and Christian interpretation of Scripture.
Tell me what you wrote your master's thesis on.
Oh,
because I don't think we've ever talked about this on air. So, I didn't know this before we came on air. The boiled down version is available. I think you can read it. It's available on our website, I believe. If not, we'll get it up there. It is, and I presented at UCLA. I know for some of our friends, Vince in Southern California, that's a bad word. That's a 4-lettered word. You don't want to say UCLA. But anyway, I presented there back in 2005. 2005, I presented the core of my research, and it is on the use of Ecclesiastes 11 verse 2, which it says, "Give a portion to 7 and unto 8."
Maybe you've heard that one, or cast your bread on the waters, that one. Tracing that because it's it's a verse that really pops out, and it doesn't get a lot of traction in rabbinic literature. Right? There's not much the rabbis can do with it. But they ended up locking it into the Feast of Tabernacles, because this idea of 7 and then 8, the eighth day, right, parallels other places where there's an eighth, a 7 and then there's an eighth, such as circumcision on the 8th day and 7 days of Sukkot and then Shemini Atzeret being the 8th day. And that association with that verse from Ecclesiastes with the Feast of Tabernacles by the Middle Ages becomes the justification for why we are to read. So there's a liturgical implication that now we read the book of Ecclesiastes during Kohelet, and there's all this about Solomon who spoke it as a prophecy and all this stuff. And anyway, so if you'd like to read that, we'll make sure to get it up if it's not already up on our website, and you can download and read the presentation. And it gets into it touches on the Ushpizin. If anybody knows, the Ushpizin are the in the Zohar. So in medieval Jewish mystical tradition, these are the 7 celestial guests. One of is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob,
Enoch,
Aaron, King David. Well, not Enoch in this particular.
Oh, I'm sorry.
version,
You're saying Ushpizin. I'm sorry. My mind was on the Merkava. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Oh yeah, see, he's a Jewish mystic in a different realm right now.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
No. Anyway, so that's what's going on. Is that how they interpret then this with bringing cast your bread on the waters is interpreted as opening your sukkah to the poor, who the rabbis later interpret as the poor Torah scholars. But in so doing, you're bringing each day you're inviting a different guest from heaven, and then there's a specific blessing that then becomes innovated, a liturgical blessing that is in the Aramaic language that is inviting the celestial visitor, the Elyonim they call them, the people on high. And so it is a fascinating study. I didn't study it because this is theology, right? This is not like a study of, this must be like real Jewish theology. No, it's not that. It's very much in a world of myth, a world of, which is the world of the Zohar. Kind of trying to understand. And so at UCLA it gave me an opportunity to share that. And anybody interested, if you can't find it online, send me a note and I'll get it to you.
Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you for that, by the way. That was all news to me. Now I have to go read it. Nice cup, by the way. And can I just tell you and tell our audience, there are new Rob and Caleb Show shirts up online, and there are new cups up online too. You can get a Rob and Caleb Show cup, which I suppose we're going to have to go ahead and buy
You're going to have to send one to me.
Yes, exactly. And we made one of our shirts is Tipping Sacred Cows Weekly with an upside down golden calf, which is very nice. And then the Rob and Caleb Show tagline, Theology Matters, Scholarship Counts, Theology Matters. And then just the Rob and Caleb Show logo as well. And so show your support.
Didn't we have someone say, hey, don't you guys realize you have Theology Matters twice on there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, you haven't listened very long, have you?
Okay, so part of this show, which we pronounce every beginning of the show, is that there's a hotline. Last week we played a hotline question that came in, comment line. Somebody had called in, and we used that clip on the show. And this week we got another one. And so 2 weeks in a row, we get to feature people from our comment line. So let's listen. Once again, I chopped this down. I took some of the spaces out, and the beginning and the ending, took the person's name out. This is from our friend Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, for sending in your comment on our comment line. Let's take a listen.
My question is, does the symbol called the Messianic Seal of Jerusalem go back to ancient times? Or is it something invented by someone recently?
Yeah, okay. So this is what you're... I should have grabbed a picture of this symbol. Here, maybe I can hold it up. There it is. There's the symbol right there that they're talking about. As you can see on my side of the screen, there is, at the top, there is a menorah. Sorry, it's out of focus now. Then a Star of David. And then below that is a fish. And this is a very common symbol.
And then the eyeball of the fish.
And then the eyeball of the fish. On this one is a cross, yes. Now, this is a very popular symbol within Messianic and Hebrew roots movement. Okay, and it came on the scene sometime in the 90s. This book, which I have, this is by the guys who claim to have found the seal. It's called the Messianic Seal of Jerusalem. And so this book, it's in the show notes for anybody who wants to know. I've referenced it in the show notes. This is by Reuven Ephraim Schmaltz and Raymond Robert Fisher. Okay, so sorry, I'm reading Philip. Philip is a sharp wit mind in the chat room. So apparently we have not responded to his emails. I apologize, Philip. Yeah, let me here. I'll give you another email address. It might have gotten lost in the shuffle. Anyway. Okay, so back to the hopefully this will not get stuck in my spam folder. Okay, back to the Jerusalem seal. Okay, so let's give you the quick rundown of this story. Now, this book was written by the guys who claim to have found this seal. They have pictures in here and everything, okay? And they claim to have found about 12 artifacts. And the artifacts that they found all have this symbol on them. We'll talk about that in a few seconds. Basically, here's the overarching story. Now, the guy who wrote this, or the people who wrote this, maybe it's a stylistic thing, but when I'm reading about archaeological things, I don't need to know about, the man loomed in the corner with his bright blue eyes and his boots shining in the moonlight. Just tell me what's going on. Stylistically, it's
you're not looking for entertainment.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to paint the picture of every little thing that was around them. And personally, when we're talking about archaeology and we're talking about finds, it just seems like it seems like fluff that you're
trying to sell something.
Well, and it seems like it doesn't sustain itself, like the information is not interesting enough, which it should be. Okay. With that being said, that's just stylistic, my personal preference. Here's the gist of what they say happened. They get in 1990. They get brought into this guy's study. He has
Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, in Jerusalem. He has these artifacts. He claims that there was this Greek Orthodox monk back in the 60s. He excavated the church that James supposedly founded, which is very close to the site that's traditionally known as the Upper Room. Okay, and so this monk says that he, on his own, went and excavated parts of this grotto and found all these different artifacts that had this symbol on it. He then gives them to this gentleman who runs a news organization. And by the way, I put a link in your show notes that has this story kind of drawn out, who has the copyrights of all this stuff. This gentleman that they're meeting with in this library now has the copyrights to this symbol. So he gives them these artifacts. They then go to a museum curator and say, hey, look, we have these artifacts. The museum curator says, oh, this is very interesting. We actually have other artifacts that have this symbol, according to what they write in this book. The book, by the way, is called The Messianic Seal of the Jerusalem Church. And then the claim by these gentlemen is that then Jewish groups within Israel then suppressed all of this. The Jewish Antiquity would not release any of this, and that basically they wouldn't do this because it proves that the early church was Jewish, and the Israeli Antiquity doesn't want that to get out. Okay. There's many different directions that we could go on this. So the question is this real or not? I'm not an archaeologist. I can't tell you whether or not this symbol has been found authentically or not. The point is, though, is that there has been nothing released saying that this. Okay, let me read you just let's see here. I'm sorry. Let me find this in the preface. All of the pieces were unquestionably authentic to even an amateur eye. To Reuven, a self-trained historian and archaeologist, self-trained, sculptor, and a longtime student of the early church and first century history in general, these pieces were clearly genuine. Okay, so they think that they're genuine. They think they're clearly genuine. And then to solidify this in the minds of the readers, these three gentlemen who are having this meeting then write their own letter of authenticity. Certificate of authenticity. This is to certify that on February 11th, 1999, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so all three of these guys sign this to say that it's authentic. These guys are not archaeologists. They've never been trained in archaeology. I don't think that they've ever been trained in dating, ancient pieces of work. Personally, once again, not an archaeologist. I'm not trained in any of this stuff. I think that I have found what look like discrepancies in the pictures that they've shown. So, for instance, I'll give you a for instance, okay? One of these pots, the top of the pot, has these circles drawn in it, right, of where the markings would go. The marking of all the markings are on the same line. They end on the same line. Now, I don't know if this is significant or not. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing here. The Jerusalem seal, however, is up. It extends above that line up to the two lines above it. So it's the only one that's above that. To me, that is very fishy. It doesn't look right. Another one, all of it has a lot of red like paint or markings on it. The Jerusalem seal is clearly much, much more bright, which to me instantly would tell me that it was put on after the original paint. They're just little things like this. But I've been talking a lot here, Rob, so jump in at any time. The last thing that I'm going to say about this is you can't just go excavate on your own in Jerusalem. For a monk to go into a grotto and excavate and find all this stuff, you're not allowed to do that. So if a museum received these things from an individual like that, the first thing that they'd have to do is turn them over to the Israeli Antiquity. And they would take them from there. They have no obligation then to keep the person who found them informed on what's going on with them. And if they found them to be fakes, I mean, what are they going to do? They're not going to release any findings. To me, I think that this seems like a very fantastic story, but until there's any kind of substantial evidence from any kind of an archaeologist who says that these findings were real or date back to the first century, I don't think that we can say that they're any earlier than at least probably I would say the 70s or 80s. What are your thoughts, Rob?
I was just looking up the three witnesses for the Book of Mormon, because you have the similar thing. You have this new find, right? The guy says, hey, I found this and this is a translation. Then you have these witnesses that say, we, through the grace of God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ, have seen the plates which contain this record, which is the record of the people of Nephi, etc., etc.
Wait, what are you reading from?
This is
The Book of Mormon?
yeah. They have these guys who like say that we bear witness that we saw the original.
Oh,
and that's authentic.
look here. I'll hold some of these
That's
up.
what it reminds me of. It
Yeah.
reminds me of that sort of thing.
Okay, so for those who can see this, I'm sorry if you're listening. Here are some of the now. Let me show you kind of what I was talking about. This one right here looks very like it was etched in much later. It doesn't look like that was original to me. This one right here, as you can see, I'll hold it up closer. Right there is where the symbol is, but it goes higher than any of the other symbols.
And the way to think of it is this. It's like the history of branding, right? This is a pretty sophisticated brand. It's not a seal. A seal is what they used to, like when they would melt wax and then press. It was a reversed image.
Yeah.
Like that, they find those boule, right? The seals, and they're backwards, right? The text is backwards so that when it imprints, it's correct.
It's
like we
right,
have
yeah.
those, from the city of David. They're excavating more and more of those from the first temple period in Judah. So what you have here is it's not really a seal, it's a brand, right? It's like a logo.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple problems with it. I agree with you, they look late, but it's highly idealized. And all our early iconography is not that clean, and there's not an element of design like you see here. Not only that,
They didn't have graphic arts degrees back then.
And not only that, the menorahs, all Jewish menorahs, I'm pretty sure because I learned this from Yoel Berkowitz. He pointed this out in Israel. The Jewish portrayals of the menorah have a tripod base, not a triangle, but 3 individual lines. And this is true up in the north synagogues, and in the south in inscriptions. Not a triangle, but 3, like a tripod. You think about a camera tripod, but small. That's what it has here. This was what hit the Temple Institute problem, because they spent millions of dollars building a menorah off the Arch of Titus rendering, and they're like, don't you know that all the Jewish ones actually have the different base, right? So that's one aspect. The other is the Star of David. The Star of David certainly is an ancient Jewish symbol. We have that in synagogues. We have in the at least from the Byzantine era. I don't know of specific Star of Davids from the Second Temple period. I wouldn't be surprised, but it wasn't exclusive. There were other geometric shapes used, and I took pictures of these when we were at the synagogue at Capernaum and other places where they have there's something that looks like a Star of David, but then they have one that's a 5-pointed star, and then they have one. It's like that. There's just different geometric designs that are being used. It's not that one is superior to the other. Another point is the fish. The fish, it is true that the fish was used, the fish symbol, at probably around maybe the 2nd century, moving on. So the time, if this is not a recent invention, if these guys did not invent it, it is not that old. So to answer the question from the listener is to say it doesn't go back to James. It doesn't go back that far.
Now this isn't
if it's old at all. This
isn't to say that it's not a good symbol.
It's not like it's a bad sign.
Yeah,
or
I mean,
I
certainly I would have no problem, drinking out of a cup that had that symbol on it, or I have no problem when people have it on, as a necklace or whatever. It's fine. People use different iconography that has come throughout the ages, right? And some of it's newer and some of it's older. That's not the issue. The real question is, did it go back to the 1st century? I really don't think so. Once again, I'm not an archaeologist. This is certainly not my field of study. However, one of the fields of study that I'm getting into is the separation of the parting of the ways, which is obviously the parting of Judaism versus Christianity, and the idea that the fish was an early Christian symbol is actually something that I would really be interested to study and to see really when we get this symbol showing up. I haven't done that study yet, and but once again, in the chat room, we have some people who are very much into archaeology. Philip being one who usually is a great wealth of information on these kind of things. Actually, Philip says this. I'll repeat this for our listeners because it's an interesting comment. He says, "I once drew a picture of a shard that a fictional character of ours used. I was horrified to find people thinking it was a real one." I'm guessing online. The same kind of thing happened when I forget who it was, and I forget exactly what picture it was, but it was when a teacher tried to show his students that he could replicate with a computer what maybe finding Nephilim would look like, the giants, right? And those pictures still show up, the fake pictures still show up quite often on websites when they're trying to show the giants were real or whatnot, and they're totally fake. Photoshopped and whatnot. So, when it comes to archaeology, really, people who are experts in the field need to be listened to. And we've talked about this extensively when we talked about some of the claims by, what was his name, who said that Hebrew came from pictographic Egyptian. And the overwhelming voice of archaeologists will tell you one thing, and it's usually the people who are a little bit fringe, who are, I don't know. When there's no other archaeologists saying, yes, this is something that needs to be looked at, I have a big problem with it, especially when you have guys who are totally untrained. A perfect example of this is the Copper Scroll Project, right?
Is that still a thing?
It's still a thing. Dude is still out there touring, trying to get support for it. But I think that the archaeological community has spoken harshly enough against the Copper Scroll Project that it's not going to go anywhere. It's just not. Okay. Anyway, so at this point, right now is when I would put in one of our sponsors, right?
Yeah.
Next show we'll do it that way. For now, I'll just tell you, go ahead and leave comments.
We're still on our learning.
We're still learning.
We're in our season 4.
Yeah.
I think it's not until season 6 that you actually have your stuff together. So
I don't know if we'll ever have our stuff together, man. This is all on the fly. 253-465-3205. Give us a call. Leave us a message. Thank you once again to Andrew for leaving that comment. We appreciate it. We always like hearing. I save every comment that comes in on that comment line. And actually, I'm gonna change that comment line message machine too, so you'll be able to hear my voice differently. Okay, let's move on. Last week, I just in passing, I mentioned. Where are my show notes? Okay. Thank you, computer, for working. Last week, I just in passing made a comment about Exodus 21:22 and following. The actual passage is Exodus 21:22 through 25. Derek, who happens to be in the chat room right now, wrote a comment on our last video, and he says, "I would seriously," and actually he yelled seriously, "I would seriously like to talk about the abortion passage in Exodus." I said that this has to do with this. My argument last week was that we see that if a miscarriage happens, the person who incurs that to the pregnant woman is liable to death for that life. And since our passage does not specify trimester, that this shows us that any trimester, any month that a miscarriage happens, the person who would cause that is liable unto death. He says, you guys know Hebrew. I really need to get some insight on this because I think the English is confusing and I could show how. Shalom. Actually, there's no need to show how. This passage has been debated hotly by scholars alike and by good scholars. In fact, in your show notes, I have provided several articles. Wayne House did one, and he did that right after Meredith Kline. Dr. Meredith Kline is one of my favorite authors to read currently. He's with the Lord now. But Dr. Kline wrote on this, and it's in your show notes. It's Kline on Exodus 21:22 through 25. His is very in-depth, and if you don't have a basic handle on Hebrew, you might kind of get a little bit into the weeds there. And so that's why I put House's article in as well. And I also have I put in a reference to a book for those who have access to a good library, a theological library. The book that I'm going to read from is called Toward Old Testament Ethics. This is by Dr. Walter Kaiser, who I've interviewed and I consider an acquaintance. I really enjoy talking to Dr. Kaiser every year that he's at the ETS and SBL, which he wasn't last year. Anyway, so let me read the passage before we jump in. This is the passage I'm reading from the ESV, Exodus 22 through 25. When men strive together, or I think some render it as wrestle together, and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, and the Hebrew here is actually her fruit comes out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So this is the passage. Do you want to jump in and say anything before I read from Kaiser?
Nope.
Now, Kaiser's going to reference actually this is going to be a little in depth as well. Kaiser is going to reference the article by Klein. So he's going to rest on Klein for some of this. So basically, the main question that circles around this passage is who gets hurt, right? When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, so there's no harm to who? In other words, the question is, does that mean that that there's no harm? In other words, the child doesn't die; it's just a premature birth. Okay, so this is one of the questions. The one who hit her shall surely be fined, as a woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Okay, so that's the first part. Okay, second part to this passage is, but if there is harm to who? And this is what the scholars are going to ask now. Who's the harm to? But if there is harm, that is to the child or to the mother or to both.
Right.
Then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, so on and so forth. So if there is harm, then you have to pay according to. So this ultimately comes down to a lot of this argument does come down to the abortion issue, right? People who think that abortion should be legal and stand behind a woman's right to choose say that the harm that is talked about in the second half of this portion is actually in regards to the mother and not in regards to the child. And so the argument goes that the first part of this text, since it's only a fine, right? It's only a fine if the child comes out early, and only if there's no harm, meaning it doesn't die. If it dies, then it's no big deal, according to the argument. And if there is no harm, but there's a premature birth, then there needs to be a payment for it. This is the argument. Of course, the other side says, no, that's not what the argument says. So let's go to Dr. Walter Kaiser on this. Most of this evidence is now being, and I'm starting halfway into his article, so he's already kind of set up some of where the grammar is in this. He says, most of this evidence is now being conceded by those who previously had adopted the case for miscarriage. But the penalty clause is another source of misunderstanding. For some interpret case A as necessitating only a pecuniary penalty, while case B calls for the Italian principle. This would seem then to suggest to some that the fetus of case A is less than human. Meredith Klein, however, has argued that bifililim does not denote a process of assessment based, as in extra-biblical legislation, on the age of the fetus. And Rob, you pointed this out to me the other day. Some of the non-biblical surrounding law, surrounding nation law, talks about this same kind of thing, right?
Oh yeah. Well, this is Meredith Klein's article brings this up, and he after getting into the Hebrew and showing from the text itself, he just adds this comment that he says, as we observed at the outset, induced abortion was so abhorrent to the Israelite mind, it was not necessary to have specific prohibition dealing with it in Mosaic law. Even the Middle Assyrian laws attest to an abhorrence that was felt for this crime, even in the midst of heathendom, is what he puts. In other words, these are Gentiles lacking illumination of special revelation. Sorry. So in other words, he's saying even these Middle Assyrian laws that are not divine, not laws from the creator of heaven and earth, even in those laws, a woman guilty of abortion was condemned to be impaled on stakes. Even if she managed to lose her own life in producing the abortion, she was still to be impaled and hung in shame as an expression of the community's repudiation of such an abomination. And then his last comment is, it's hard to imagine, and he wrote this in the 70s, mind you, because Dr. Klein's with the Lord now. It's hard to imagine a more damning commentary on what is taking place in, quote, enlightened America today than that provided by this legal witness out of the conscience of ancient paganism. In other words,
the pagans were so against it that they would impale people, impale women who attempted to do this.
And so he just brings us up. This is not the bulk of his argument, but he's like, for those who are suggesting that the Torah, which is a revelation from, it's inspired by the Holy Spirit, in other words, right? Given from God. If that it doesn't mention this, well, except in this case we do, that Dr. Klein pulls out, that how much more, right? These are what we would call, he calls them heathen, which is funny because that's Old English. We generally don't use that term now, but they're Gentiles, a Gentile law. And so I think that is very, very telling, that to assume the liberal position that, it's, the fetus it's just the fetus, it's not really a person, that's a real new type of angle to come at the text. It's not grounded in Scripture itself.
Philip is asking if you could reference that. That's in Meredith Klein's article, which is in the show notes. Meredith Klein's article. He wrote that for ETS, for the Jets. It was a Jets article in 1976, written by Klein. I believe it was issue number 13. However, I do have a link.
And you can Google it. I just typed in the title. I'm sure you'll be able to find it.
Okay. So let me continue on here then with Walter Kaiser. Rather, he, that is Meredith Klein, notes that in every context where what he takes to be an adjectival form, pelili, with an eclectic mem, that is pelilim, is used, it deals with an offense of a most serious nature. In fact, the meaning could well be liability to death. The preposition bet, or be, is the bet of equivalence that, interestingly enough, is also used in the Italian formula in Deuteronomy 19:21 to replace the more usual tachat, a life as an equivalent of a life. Klein concludes, hence, Bilim in Exodus 21:22 may be regarded as an archaic legal formula expressing the same principle of ransoming a forfeited life that is more fully expressed in Exodus 21:30. The suggested translation for verse 22, according to Klein, would be, he must pay for his forfeited life, or he must pay as one deserves of death or retribution. This is not long from here on out. Stay with me here. Feticide, we conclude, is indeed murder, and only when the fetus presents a danger to the life of the mother should abortion be considered at all. And it does have a footnote on this, and I won't read the footnote now, but he's saying that this is debated, of course, by scholars. The lex talionis refers to both cases, when harm, ason, is done to either the child or the mother. But in spite of Klein's moving discussion of bifelilim, the contrast in verses 22 through 23 would appear to be between the instances when no damage has come to either mother or child, verse 22, and where the damage has come to mother and child, or both, verse 23. The contrast is Velo yehye ason, that is, and no harm occurs in verse 22, and ve'im ason yehye, and if harm occurs, verse 23. The value that God sets on the fetus can be seen from the text we quoted earlier from Psalm 139:16. The clause is, your eyes saw my unformed body, i.e. my embryo, Galmi. God it was then who knit me together in my mother's womb and knew me in the paternal state. The value and the worth of the forming child is clearly established.
Yeah.
I mean, full disclosure, I'm anti-abortion 100% of the time. I think that the punishment of an innocent life for the mistake of a couple, or of a heinous sin of rape or something like that. I don't think that the punishing an innocent life is the right way to go. I don't think it's an unforgivable sin for a woman to have an abortion. So please don't hear me say that. If you're out there listening to this and you have had an abortion, my heart goes out to you. But that doesn't mean that it was right. It just means that, the Lord has mercy on all of us, and we all sin, and we all have things on our conscience that we have to bring before the Lord. I think abortion is one of those things. I am 100% pro-life. I am 100% anti-abortion. I've marched with the rallies. I have stood in front of Planned Parenthood and protested. I stand firm in my resolve that abortion is clearly against God. God is the God of life, not the God of death. And therefore, I think that especially killing an innocent child, to be honest with you, on a personal note, my stance against abortion became extremely strong once I had children. The idea that someone could take, a child before, in such a vulnerable state is now just absolutely abhorrent to me, and has become very personal, being able to see my own children. And so, I know that this is controversial, and I know that there are believers out there who are pro-choice, and I will not waver on that. I have no apologies about my stance on abortion. Anything else you want to say about that passage, Rob?
I just have from Luke 1. Where Elizabeth says, "For behold, when the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby leaped in my womb for joy." She's talking about John the Baptist leaping for joy. That means the baby it's not just a fetus. This is like, there's joy, right? Wow.
And now with modern technology, we're able to see the unborn child. We know that we know when nerve endings come into play and pain is felt. We know when heartbeats start. But the thing that we can't see with modern technology is, at what point does God infuse a soul into that life? And the point for me as a believer and someone who attempts at all times to follow what God wants me to do, the idea of coming against one of the children of God, also as a person who believes in the doctrines of grace, I fully believe that children who are unborn can be saved, right? God chooses who he will choose. That could be every unborn child. I don't know, right? God can choose whoever he wants. So that means that God could choose every single child that's unborn to be part of the elect. For someone to then come against one of God's elect, especially in a defenseless state, is chilling to me for that person.
Oh, Andrew has a good point. Life is in the blood. The nephesh is in the dam. That's what it says in Leviticus.
Yeah.
So in other words, sanctity of life is continuity of life, right? And that's a really good point. All right.
Okay. Enough on that. And thank you, Derek. Actually, Derek, in the chat room, the person who sent in the question, I believe his wife is pregnant now. Congratulations, Derek. Fatherhood is a life-changing experience. There's no doubt about it. Okay. I have one last thing. I didn't think we were going to have time to get to it because I thought we were going to be a lot more long-winded on the Exodus passage. Now, I want to make sure that people know a couple things about this. First of all, I was sent this video, I think 4 times this last week.
By different people.
By different people. I'm not going out and trying to find, trying to beat up on Mr. Mark Biltz or El Shaddai Ministries. I would also like to state that I have actually reached out to Mr. Biltz. I wrote him an email about a week ago saying, we're both believers. We're both in the same city. I hold you as a brother in the Lord. If you'd like to get together and talk, or if you'd like to talk on the phone or via email and, talk about some of our differences, here are some of the differences that I see within the way that we approach the scriptures, and I would be more than happy to discuss these things with you. I have yet to hear back from Mr. Biltz. This, though, now, once again, I'm not trying to beat up on Mr. Biltz. If I didn't know some of Biltz's previous work, I would have honestly thought this was a satirical video. It's not. He's very serious in this, and I think this will probably take some explaining because he can't see his screen when he's discussing this. Now, for those in the chat room and for those who are familiar with our show, I would just, I don't have my ding sound, but I would just encourage you to think of maybe some of the initial problems. And I know that the Hoff could go off at this point, but, let's reserve ourselves a little and honestly talk about maybe some of the issues that that this form of interpretation of Scripture might have. Now, for those who don't know who Mark Biltz is, Mark is the leader of an organization called El Shaddai Ministries. It's here in Tacoma, Washington. He has quite a good following. He wrote a book on the 4 blood moons, which then was picked up actually by Hagee. I don't know what happened with that. I think that there was some legal issues with that. Anyway, Mr. Biltz is very into astronomy and very into signs in the heavens, and is quite convinced that the recent solar eclipse, which was on August 21st, was a sign from God to America to repent. He also believes that these now in the hurricanes that came after the and this is not only his view, right? I mean, my YouTube suggestions are just filled with because I've watched some of Mr. Biltz. Now my suggestions are just filled with end time prophecy, judgment on America, all these things. September 23rd. All these kind of things. So let's listen to what Mr. Biltz has to say. He's going to talk about the solar eclipse, mainly the hurricane that hit Texas on the 25th, and then he's going to talk about Luke 21, verse 25. Let's listen to what he has to say.
In Luke 21:25, where it talks about being signs in the sun, moon, and stars, it also says there will be the roaring of the sea and the waves in the same verse. So what are the odds, not only that you have those things, what are the odds there would be a Bible verse explaining the end of days? We would see signs in the sun in the same verse talking about the sea and the waves roaring. What do you think the odds are of that? Now, do you want to see something really astronomical?
Yeah, I do.
Luke 21:25 is one of my favorite verses because Genesis 1:14, God says there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. And Luke 21:25, Jesus confirms there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. So what are the odds of having both the total solar eclipse and a hurricane the same week? Well, what are the odds that it would happen on the 21st and the 25th?
Right now, you can't see it, but there's arrows pointing to Luke 21 and another one 25. And this is what he's very excited about, is that the date corresponds to the verse, chapter and verse in this Luke passage. So
that it would happen on the 21st and the 25th. The solar eclipse happens on the 21st. The hurricane happens on the 25th. Now, coincidental? I mean, God is pointing us to this verse saying we are living in these times.
So,
who else but God could do that?
Okay, let's
Okay,
let's break it down for just a second.
Let's repeat back what I'm taking away from what I just heard. The eclipse and hurricane. What's the one that starts with H?
Hank. I don't know.
Okay, the one that hit Houston.
Yes.
Was on the 21st of August and the 25th of August.
The 21st of August, 25th of August, yes.
Yeah, the 21st and 25th of August, 2017.
Yes.
Luke 21:25
yes.
talks about signs in the heavens and raging seas.
Yes.
And so he says that this is only God. God, in Luke 21:25 is his new favorite verse because 21 in Luke means the 21st of August, 2017, and the 25th verse means, so that the 21st chapter of Luke points to the 21st of August. The 25th verse of chapter 21 points to the 25th of August, 2017, because those two have to be read together because we can't, had Irma happened yet?
No.
Okay,
when he did this, yes, it had. Yes, it had.
Oh, but he doesn't have a number for Irma. It just follows. Wow. And that only could God, he says this is like the most, he says this is astronomical. This is his new favorite verse, and only God could do this. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. So can I tell you a couple of things that let me tell you just a couple of things that first come to mind when I hear this kind of teaching. And honestly, once again, if I didn't know Mr. Biltz, I would think that this was satire because in my personal opinion, this is, I don't know how else to say this. This is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, the signs in the heavens, yes, there will be signs in the heavens, but will they be things that are natural? I don't understand how something that occurs naturally, like and something that is predicted, not only from a couple days ahead or whatever, but predicted from hundreds of years prior. I don't understand how that's a sign. That's number one. Number two, when Luke wrote, he didn't write in his chapter and his verses. That's not part of the canon. That's not part of the actual Bible text. That is supplied for you by much, much, much later translations in order for us to be able to find things. But it's not actually part of the Bible. And I wonder if that actually might have slipped his mind, or if he thinks maybe God is just using the later verse and chapter markings to prove a point.
Those are inspired, maybe. I wouldn't say that the chapters and verse numbers are inspired. I think it's a helpful tool used by people who want to study God's word, and it's a helpful tool, but they're certainly not necessary. Because obviously in the first century, or even our earliest manuscripts of Tanakh or of Greek apostolic writings, have no chapter and verse. So if right, yeah, this is just really weird. It's really weird. But you know what, Caleb? It's not surprising. I mean, in a way, it sounds. It's like, wow, I can see. So what is it going to be next week? How does he top it? If this is the astronomical, he gets them to go, woo. This was the same thing. What was the thing last time? Oh, the 400. That it's about 400, and that it's a sign of the Paleo-Hebrew mark of the sign, and the gematria is 400, and everybody's just thinking this is like this amazing revelation. I'm just like, I'm sad for these people.
Well, to be honest with you, I think that one of the strengths that Mr. Biltz has is keeping his audience excited about what he's talking about. He's very good at that. That's not a put down. I think that actually that's one of his strengths in being a teacher and even a leader, is that he keeps people interested in things. The unfortunate part,
not necessarily for the good of the body of Messiah, but just as a general
speaking point,
as just a professional speaker.
Yes,
that he has an audience that, yeah.
So to me, the unfortunate part is that I feel like he's not doing justice to, honestly, reality in biblical texts.
It says it has to be America, right? Because eclipses occur anywhere from 2 to 5 times every year. They're completely predictable. completely predictable, years and years and years and years and years in advance. And we can go back in time and see when they happen all over the globe. We have, of course, the hurricanes are not so predictable, but they are more predictable in the short run. But it's very America focused, right? Because he's saying that Luke 21:25 has to do with America too, because it's the Gregorian calendar used today that he's saying is part of the symbol.
Yeah, it's not even the Hebrew calendar.
Part of the meaning.
Yeah,
it's not. It's
good,
people who use a different calendar.
Good catch. He's not using the Hebrew calendar. He's using the Gregorian calendar.
But he'll use the Hebrew calendar when it'll fit, right? When he can make it get some traction.
So hang on just a sec.
It's a pick and choose and then cover everything else up that will distract from the point he wants to get the people, the effervescence. I don't know what you call it, the charisma or whatever that.
The chat room asks this, and actually, surprisingly, Andrew asks this. He says, if there was an eclipse in Mexico, would that mean that judgment would be coming against Mexico? Actually, I have to give Biltz credit for being somewhat consistent in this. Biltz says that when the last one happened over Turkey or something like that, he also tries to say that there was one when right before Jonah went into Nineveh, there was an eclipse a couple days before that, which... I'm sorry, but according to what we know about the calendar and how much things have changed and how off we could be by years and years, it's pretty ridiculous to think that you know exactly when Jonah went into Nineveh. Nonetheless, yes, Mr. Biltz will say no matter where a full solar eclipse is, it is a warning to repent. I'm all for repentance, actually. But one thing that you said about Luke 21:25 now being about America. Let's read this text. Let's read the text of Luke 21. I'm going to start in verse 6 because he's talking about things that are going to happen very quickly after, like within 100 years of his being there. It says, as for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. What's he talking about? He's talking about the temple, right? And he's talking about the destruction of the temple, which happened in 70. So right now he's back in time from where we are. He's prophesying of things that will come from their viewpoint, but certainly not in the 20th century. Verse 7, and they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he said, See that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. Then he said to them, I went too far. Then he said to them, Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes in various places, famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. Now, I have to ask you, Rob, do you think that do you think this is a telescope, or do you think that he's still talking about the destruction in 70?
I don't know. I know that there's both together. I take it as, and this is where I think we would agree with Pastor Biltz. We would say we need to take God's word seriously. Yeah. We need to be sober-minded. We need to be like the one who is, like the servant who is awake and waiting when his master returns, etc. All these things are good and true. But where we will split is that we will insist on it. We kind of diverge from that point, it seems, with the likes of Pastor Biltz, in that we're saying we need people to be equipped with the content, with real oil, right? So that, like the 5 wise virgins versus the 5 foolish, we want to equip people to have wisdom in their waiting.
Yes.
Rather than the sensational 5 foolish that come and show up because they heard about it and they're excited about it, but they didn't prepare. And when the rubber meets the road, they're going to go, oh, what we need, we really are lacking what we need, and that's going to be the difference maker. So we don't believe it's wise. I'll just say, Dr. or Pastor Biltz, with all my heart, I believe that you are not teaching people biblical wisdom. You're teaching them to think incorrectly. You're giving high value, and you're exalting things that are foolish, and that people are getting excited, and you're getting worked up emotionally, and it's a category mistake. They're assigning things importance and spiritual significance that in Yeshua's kingdom are nothing. And that's the problem.
So I want to keep reading because remember the verse that Mr. Biltz is now using to say this is in respect to not only the Gregorian calendar, okay, but in response to the things happening in America. Listen to Luke 21. Now I'm going to start now in verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Also, alas, for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword, and be led captive among all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations, in perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear and with foreboding, so on and so forth. So, several things. First of all, he's talking about Jerusalem falling. Mr. Biltz has not explained to us how Jerusalem is currently fallen. Second of all, are we to understand then, according to Mr. Biltz, that the time of the Gentiles has been fulfilled?
Yeah, I think he would say these are signs of end times. Yeah, I think he probably would if say something.
But Jerusalem hasn't been surrounded and trampled down yet.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to me like all of the Lego pieces have been. My son does this to me. My son loves Legos now, which is a blessing to me because I love to play with Legos as well. So now he's always asking me to build Legos for him, which is great. So we'll sit down and we'll play with Legos. And just yesterday, I was building some Legos with him. He wanted a surveillance van that we had purchased for him. He wanted that built, and so I'm building this surveillance van, right? And it's quite a long task. It took me about an hour and a half. It's huge.
Wow.
And he finds an antenna, a black antenna, and we've separated. He has so many Legos now. We've separated them into color. So he finds a black antenna and he says, "Dad, you're going to need this." Now, I'm still at the base. This antenna goes on the top, on the roof.
When it's all done.
When it's all done. It's the last piece you put on.
So he's seen the picture, though.
Yeah.
And that antenna
right
means something. Yeah.
And the point is, and I kept telling him, okay, buddy, yeah, I do need that. You're right. But we have to build the whole rest of it first before we can put that on. There's nowhere to put that right now. To me, it feels like what Biltz is doing is he's got the antenna, and he's like, aha, see? I got the antenna right here. Now let's put it on the final, we've built let's put it on. And the point is that no, the Bible speaks in this way of these things have to fall into place first. You have to put these other Legos in first before you can put this antenna on. He's totally negated building the rest of the structure. He just has the antenna waiting to go.
Well, so now we have not only, we have a couple things. We have Hebrew word pictures he's used, gematria, so the numerical value, and now he uses what they call bibliomancy, basically, where you ascribe things like the numbers of chapters and verses to have, like, that God's communicating now through the number 21 and the number 25 in the Gospel of Luke that corresponds to the American, the calendar of North America in the year 2017. I mean, this is, no one, no one in ancient Israel ever did this kind of thing.
All this,
Yeshua never taught this way. Why would a disciple of Yeshua take it upon themselves to innovate such methods of communicating to people in the name of in God's name. It's to me it's scary. It's someone who doesn't have,
but
they never learned.
That's not
never had.
That's not the most scary thing to me. Here's the thing: is that all this, I disagree with Mr. Biltz on this, and I think I've shown why. But this all pales in comparison to the fact that 2 weeks ago he had Itzhak Shapira come in and speak. Shapira has never he's never recanted on the idea that Yeshua and Metatron are one and the same.
Yeah. So there, what we have is a cluster. We have a den of false teachings. Really, a den of wrong-headedness. But it sells. Evidently, it sells right now.
Well, we certainly aren't getting a piece of that pie. There's no doubt about that.
Wouldn't want it. Wouldn't want it
anyway. Okay. Well, hey, you can think that we're totally wrong. And if you do, we encourage you to get a hold of us, 253-465-3205. That's 253-465-3205. Send us emails, especially if you're not in the chat room. If you want to contribute something to this conversation, we'd love for you to do so. Chegg, that's CHEGG at TorahResource.com. It's Chegg at TorahResource.com. Big thank you. Man, it really looked like a good amount of conversation was going on in the chat room today. And, you know, if I had it my way, I'm sure I'd sit here and just read every single comment. And I'm sorry that we can't read every comment. But Philip, please send us over your emails again. I don't think that I got them. And if I did, maybe they got lost in the shuffle. I apologize for that. But we will certainly look at your emails when they come in. Okay. Anything else you want to say, Rob?
Nope.
Okay. Well, in that case, one of the reasons that we give you so many ways to get a hold of us is because we build this show on the things that you guys send us. And as you can see, this entire show that we just had was completely based on comments and different suggestions from our listeners. So please be a part of that. Send us emails. Get a hold of us one way or the other. Leave comments on our YouTube page, whatever you want to do, and let us know what you want us to talk about, because I'm pretty sure we'll probably actually talk about it at some point. And the one thing that we want to do on this show is to not tickle ears in any way, shape, or form, but to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua, the Messiah.